as we come to vote for election 2020. I'm here with guest Sarah Putt from CIO and Computer World. How are you, Sarah?
I'm very well, and yourself?
Great. Good to spend a little bit of time delving into this election. Personally, I try and keep away from as much as I can to do with politics, but at times you might notice I'll put myself out there with some opinions and suggest things that I think politicians and others should be thinking about. And today is a bit of that sort of opportunity for both of us.
Yep.
But I'm very keen to hear some of your thoughts and just a chance to sort of delve in, because yes, we're going to the polls. I guess how much we should consider the technology policy within the sort of broader choices around voting, I guess is one area that we could discuss, but also looking and seeing, well, you know, what parties really have a focus on tech this election, which of course, you know, my personal view is that, you know, technology is so important to New Zealand's success as a nation, to our future. It's something that advances at a really rapid pace, and we should be trying to, you know, attach our wagon to the growth and the forward momentum that technology and innovation can bring. And by utilising technology well, that can flow back to help us address some of the challenges we have from an economic standpoint and a balanced standpoint with equality and other things within New Zealand generally, and even helping us to do things that ultimately will help our environment be able to be looked after long term. So I may be a little bit biased on these things, but I think let's use tech as much as we can within reason.
Absolutely, I join you in your bias. I think we all of us who work in the tech sector and have been around it for a while can see the huge potential, both, like to your point, both economically and socially, because it's enabler. When we saw that in COVID, we saw that our school kids had to stay home, and so they had to push out a whole bunch of devices and internet connections to those who didn't have it. We're seeing it in our economy. Just when you think about how the tech sector survived COVID, we know that the SaaS platforms, the ones that were really the good, the technology companies, they're doing fine. They hardly missed a beat. So yeah, absolutely, tech as a sector, as producing tech as enabler for every other sector, and tech as a way of bringing everybody up in our society, as well as environmental and sustainability policies. It's got it all, tech. Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
You should be running for government here, Sarah.
No, not at all. But it's funny you should say that, because there's really only been a couple of tech political parties that have been really out there in terms of like pushing a tech policy and sticking a name on it and saying this is our tech policy. The rest have kind of like either had a little bit in their own policies or just kind of ignored the whole topic. So I'm talking, of course, about National and the Greens. So two ends of the political spectrum, as it happens. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because they do seem quite opposed. So the interest in their policies, and some of which we'll chat about today, I imagine people's interest in those will very much relate to their political leanings, right? Because we've got one on the left, one on the right. Personally, I guess I like to look sort of across the board and pick and choose things from either side that I like the look of. And ultimately, you're never going to find exactly what you want when it comes to voting for any party in any case, right? So no party can tick all the boxes for everybody, I wouldn't imagine.
No, and as we keep hearing in an MMP world, which we should all be very familiar with by now, it's all about priorities and plans. It's not about policies, because it's just when they get to that bargaining table, it would be really hard to see a national green coalition. But if they did, we'd have all the tech sector, all the policies in one place, wouldn't they? So
they might be somewhat conflicted, though.
I can't imagine how they'd last 3 years, but you never know, right? Probably do know. So yeah, so no.
And hence I think that the Green Party have already said that they won't work with the National Party.
I think you're right, and
so
it's
not too much chance of that.
There's almost none. So but you never know. So anyway, but yes, you're right, and very much their policies kind of reflect who they are. But what I would stress about these policies and plans as well is that just because Labour or ACT or any of the parties that might get in haven't been specific about their policies doesn't mean that they can't happen anyway. So one of the policies that has met with some wide support amongst all the tech groups that I've spoken to, and I'm talking right across the spectrum, so your NZ Rise, which is your Buy Kiwi Made type organisation, through to NZ Tech, which is a whole raft of different tech companies both overseas and in New Zealand, through to ITP, which is the people who work in IT skills, that kind of thing. They've all been quite pleased to see that National's come up with something called a Minister for Technology. That portfolio has never really existed in that form before. So that's something that maybe, depending on who gets in, would be something that would be good for all parties to look for. Because at the moment, the technology sector, if you like, is kind of spread across 5 different ministers. So when they want to go for cybersecurity, they've got to go to Andrew Little, GCSB. When they want to go for innovation and research and development, it's Megan Woods. When they want to go for overseas policies or whatever, it might be David Parker. Chris Farfoy's got the Broadband. They've all got different ones. And so what would happen is if you had one stop shop and said, okay, we just go to this minister and that minister can talk to all the rest. It's like it would be a really interesting approach to the portfolio.
Yeah, I'm certainly interested to see how that might play out. The nature of technology today is the threads of technology run through everything, right? So it actually doesn't matter what portfolio somebody has. There is a technology element to that, whether it's the Minister of Health, in that case, he or she, needs to be considering the role of technology in healthcare. So, these things will run across the board, but having that central minister, I can see there being a lot of sense in that too.
Yeah, well, I jolly well wish they would in health look at digital technology because if you talk to someone like health IT, Scott Arrell, for example, he'll say it's 2.5% spend on the health budget on IT. It should be double that, which would make it sort of a global average. And we just have to really up our game right across tech in terms of health IT. Another one, of course, is cybersecurity. Well, we've seen what's happened in the recent attacks.
And I would tend to argue on those fronts by under investing, then it costs you a lot more than any money that you save, right? Because technology is that enabler. It's that thing that gives you leverage. It's that thing that allows you to get much more out of the other dollars that you spend.
Absolutely.
And we've certainly seen those the impact of lacking from a cybersecurity perspective in the health sector as just one example.
One example, and the health is that is one. There's cybersecurity, and then there's health, and then there's things like social equity around digital divide, addressing those issues, those sorts of things. So that it's across, like you say, it's across every portfolio, but it's got to be thought of and it's got to be understood. And one of the things that we see a lot of in tech is the innovation is right out in front, and the regulations that sort of trailing behind, and that's always going to be a tension between regulation, innovation, but you have to have at least an understanding. You have to be able to converse. You have to be able to get on the phone to these to companies here and also overseas, discuss what's going on, how it's happening, what's coming down the line, how are we supposed to address all these different technologies which are fundamentally changing our society.
And now National have given a little bit of you've read through this and spent a bit more time studying it than I have, as I would expect.
Yes.
And you've written a piece. Is that out yet?
Yeah, no, that's in Computer World. So
Yep.
please go there. That we wrote that when the National Party came out with their policy. What I like about their policy is that I'm old-fashioned. I quite like figures. I like it when they put dollars next to what they're going to do. It's quite a clear policy. So they're talking in quite sort of like, we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. So what are they going to do? They're going to, Minister of Technology, they're going to have 1,000 tertiary scholarships for low decile schools for kids to encourage them into STEM, which is, well, your audience should know, science, technology, engineering, maths. They would argue that possibly from an economic perspective, the more people understand that, the better jobs that they can get, the more, we can address the skill shortage. I also argue it from an academic sense that it's good to know how stuff works. That's a really good thing to know.
Oh, yeah.
Huge. And that is the heart of STEM. The other one is, just looking over my notes, $1 billion for ultra-fast broadband and rural broadband initiatives for the next 10 years. I think there's an argument to say that they're going to spend that anyway, regardless of who's around, just because this is roading now. This is critical infrastructure. You're not probably going to let that one slide. It's just... And
we've seen, really both sides of both political sides, whichever leanings, the investment has gone in. And we've seen that during these, work from home situations with COVID. We've heard about what's happened in Australia and other countries where their broadband hasn't been up to snuff.
Yep.
And we've seen the benefits for New Zealand of being at the level we're at. And I think, hopefully, most people from a government perspective understand the importance of continuing that investment. And we've seen both sides invest, but credit to National that
they've put the money on the table.
They're putting it out there
totally.
and making a commitment. But as you say, we would expect the investment to continue from other sides, but exactly how that plays out is somewhat unknown.
Well, if you look at the expansions to UFB and RBI, most of that was kind of mandated in the sort of dying days of the national government. But certainly Labor has kept, it's pedal to the metal on this program.
Oh yeah,
a lot of it came from some towards the end, especially the rural program, from the Provincial Growth Fund, which was obviously New Zealand firsts under Shane Jones. So yes, absolutely, it would be difficult to see why we wouldn't. We've proven to the whole country. Just on that though, they didn't just put a whole bunch of money into it, they restructured the entire sector, which is, so all the hard work's done right on that one. So, but yeah, to your point, good to see that they're putting that investment on the table. Another one is interesting, is the Elevate Fund. Now this is this $300 million venture capital fund, which is supposed to address between those businesses that are startups, tech startups across the board, that they've got some customers, they're looking like they're going really well, they're getting about between sort of $3 million and $10-12 million in revenue, but they need that extra funding to go the extra step. Now that was found to be a gap. They did a bit of study. They said, okay, that's a gap. So they put this Elevate Fund into the market like about 3 or 4 months ago. It's super fresh. It goes over a few years, but the idea is it will match venture capital funding in a Kiwi IT or Kiwi tech business. Now that's kind of where the gap was, and that's where they've addressed it, and they've put a whole bunch of rules and regulations around it, etc. So that's a really interesting one. Now what National's saying is that they want 2/3 of that fund to be used just for startups. So sort of routed away from those kind of companies that have got a little bit of run on the board and wanting to go that next step. So that's an interesting one. It seems to go with National's whole philosophy around, well, if you haven't come through COVID very well, if you've been made redundant, one of the pathways forward for you is to start your own business. I suspect that's where some of that's coming. I would like to see more research around it to see where the thinking is in that, because that's a lot of taxpayer money.
It is, but in the light of some of the money that's been spent in recent months through COVID, there's, I think, an argument to say, let's put foot to the floor. We have to make fast decisions.
Yep.
And certainly we look over the last few months, there have been lots and lots of really fast decisions that had to be made. If we sit back and spend 6 to 12 months doing a
you're right,
a study, we may miss, we would miss some opportunities. Now, decisions made at pace aren't always going to be perfect, but that said, decisions need to be made, and I would be concerned if we slow things down too much. I did like this headline in the national policy, which reads, National will double the size of New Zealand's technology sector by 2030. Now, I don't necessarily like this will. There's a bit too much confidence in there, and it's like, hey, look at us, we're amazing. And of course, it's not the government that actually makes this happen.
No.
But of course, they can support that. They're looking at the Technology Investment Network report and other things, which highlight that our tech exports could easily become our number one export earner within a fairly short space of time. And they're drawing on lots of other people's knowledge on this, but I think for me, I'm very keen to see us continue growing this sector. And as we talked about at the beginning, the lift to our economy and other things is there.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think anyone, certainly not in tech sector, is going to argue with you on that. And the argument is we'll get there anyway, right? So because we do have a whole bunch of very smart people in this sector who are creating great products, who have proved their tech. And just to go back to the Elevate Fund, why I say about the research is because that's been done. And
Right.
one of the things you want to do when you have a great startup and you've proven yourself and you've got your customers and you need that next step is you don't want to give away too much equity. You don't want to give it to the first person who goes, okay, and then when you get to the really big stage and you get the real big investors coming in, they'll go, well, you've got a great product and a great tech, but you've given away all your equity, and it's such a balance. And so I feel like that work's been done, but I'm probably just quibbling around the edges. The good thing about this policy is that it recognises the strength of this sector that people like yourself and I have been around for, fortunately, for a long, long time, and have been really impressed and amazed by the talent that we've seen and that we continue to see.
And it really is accelerating, isn't it? When you look around at the startups, when you look at the funding challenges that there were a decade ago, 5 years ago, those challenges are certainly reducing over time. But to see a political party that is giving this attention, and look, Labour is as well, but the approach here seems to have some good wisdom to it.
Yes.
And these are things that I think for many will influence their voting, but it's not the whole picture, is it?
No, it's not. And one of the things, like they've talked about a regulatory icebreaker unit in the National Party follows. They just threw that in. What does that look like? Does it look like in the dying days of the national government they passed that law basically enabling Rocket Lab to launch in Mahia Peninsula? I think most of us would probably say that was a good thing. So is it something like that, or is it something else? Is it all, you can come over, you can do whatever you like, see what you think, to attract international investment without, like what I was saying before about innovation here and regulation down here. Regulation doesn't have to be a dirty word. It can be an enabler, and it can be a way of creating a better and more competitive market. So like to see something. I think sometimes somebody comes up with that term or that word, sounds quite good, they pop it in, but where's the flesh on the bones? What does it mean?
Yeah, look, I certainly would like to see more, and I've spoken publicly about this. I would like to see more international firms being able to come to New Zealand, set up shop here, get rolling, because we have the right regulatory environments that are balanced and supportive. But maybe we just happen to move at a faster pace than other countries, and then attract those opportunities that otherwise would end up elsewhere. Whisk Aero is one that comes to mind, with the autonomous air taxis that have been in development in the South Island, over a period of years. A fair bit of funding that goes in that direction. Obviously, we've got that environment that works for Rocket Lab and a number of others now within that aerospace sector. So it can play out well if it's done right, and a really key aspect is moving at pace, and just having this policy or this thing raised, that national would look at it, certainly just puts that pressure on hopefully across the board for New Zealand, that we don't have our eye off the ball for too long, because I mean, even right now as the country has COVID in a more managed state than what we were earlier on in the year. We very much need to be thinking, what does the next phase look like? Do we open up and bring more technologists into New Zealand, and varying things down that track, and some of that will kind of cross into these areas that are, if our government has that that sort of drive and focus, and very hard at the moment when dealing with COVID to actually balance and juggle these things, and maybe to look as broadly as what some of us would like.
Absolutely, but what's wrong with a bit of ambition, right? And what's wrong with a bit of vision? And I think I was talking to somebody just actually today, and we were talking about cybersecurity, and he was saying, imagine if we were a cybersecurity hub, if we could see ourselves as a really safe place to be in business, if we could just basically up our thinking a little bit in that area. We're safe, we haven't got COVID, and I'm touching wood when I say this, and I'm and I know, and as we all do, team of 5 million wasn't easy, but we should be proud of that. We can do so much more. We can create this kind of really great business tech friendly nation, but it's one that looks after all our people, leaves nobody behind, creates technology that enables everybody, and that everybody in our nation has a chance to be part of it. And I think that's maybe where the STEM scholarships come in. I mean, we need more diversity in our sector, and that's not just gender, it's also ethnicity.
Agreed. Now, looking at what the Greens have put forward, that probably segues in nicely. They've talked about, look, internet should be something that everybody has access to. It effectively, look, this should be free and available to all. We should be running everything on open source software. New Zealand, everything as much as possible. Does that work? What are your thoughts on how do you get this stuff right? Because for me, when I look at my home, we've got that internet access. Our son has a great opportunity to learn, but I know that there are other homes very nearby where that access to the internet either doesn't exist, or it's very limited. Maybe one one device. Parents maybe that don't really understand or use the internet themselves. So I can see the challenge there, but I'm not quite sure what is the best way to actually address these things. How much of that should be through the education system? How much do you open these things up? Because the internet can also be a place of harm as well.
Yes, it's actually a really interesting question. Internet New Zealand have their digital inclusion plan, and they've got about 50 organisations signed up, and that includes telcos and that kind of thing. And the only political party that I know that it's signed up today is the Greens, and that's really pledging, I guess, taxpayer funding and money and oomph behind this idea that everybody in the country should have some kind of access to the internet. Now, there will be some people who don't want it, that's fine, but I think we should definitely...
Or is it?
Well, I think in the end you should be allowed to turn off if you really want to. I mean, I'm thinking it would be a very small amount of people, and occasionally you have to.
Well, I quite like being offline for times, but the opportunities, sitting on planes and locations without internet access are it's largely dried up.
But having said that, I mean, there's always going to be people who don't want to participate, and I think we live in a democratic society, and you're allowed to do that.
Of course.
But having said that, I think it's really important that our students have access to the internet and to broadband and to digital devices, not just a phone but an actual kind of proper device that they can actually do their homework in, because the expectations rise. We've connected all our schools. They've got great broadband. There's some fantastic safety measures around it. It's all there, right? Network for Learning, all of that. They were priority. Those in the hospitals were the priorities, and they got it, and it's good. But the expectation is, you'll be able to do that at home. And there was a wonderful quantitative report which the Vodafone Foundation put out a couple of years ago, and it just breaks your heart when you read it, and these kids don't have it, and you've got mums having to take the whole whānau to the library at night so one of their kids can sit outside and get the free Wi-Fi and do the homework. I mean, that stuff is not what we want in this country. Now, we have a whole bunch of other problems we've got to solve first. There's are the kids getting enough to eat? Are they being housed in the right places? And rightly so, probably. That's where it should sit. Well, I shouldn't say probably, because it is really. But in your Maslow
there is a
hierarchy
crossover
of
though
needs,
too, isn't there? In terms of actually paying for these things, the more we leverage tech and innovation, the more money flows into the economy that can actually
some of it can go
fund some of those things.
Absolutely.
Right?
And so you've got to say, where does broadband sit in the needs? But then what happens when we close the schools? Because we've provisioned for education for every child in New Zealand, but what happens when we close the schools? And that's what happened this year. So obviously the Ministry of Education put out, and I think from memory, around 40,000 devices have gone out, which is great. Be really great to see some more work in this, some really solid work that said where are the gaps and how can we address them properly. Some of them are obviously going to be geographical. They just live too far away, so that, I guess, satellite is always going to be in the mix. But how much of it is, how can we bridge that economic gap? So, like you say, every child has access to the internet and is able to learn when those schools are closed. Because let's face it, I mean, it's a horrible thing to think, but this pandemic isn't going away, and it might come back, and we might get another one 10 years from now. We know we live in this world now.
So there's probably a lot more that we could delve into on both sides. Was there anything else from the Green Party perspective that you think we should cover before we wrap up?
I think the Green Party have very much taken a more ideological route, as opposed to a National taking a more practical route. The only thing I would sum up with the whole thing is, just next time, whatever government gets in, or whatever colour, please think about the enabler that tech is. And it is New Zealand Inc., but it's also making sure that everybody rises together. And I think technology could do that. And give me a call, I can tell you 10 people straight away who would be dying to get in there and help you. Tech people are very generous, and they want to share their knowledge. They don't want to hoard it. They want to share it. And there's so many people who've, in that sort of second generation of tech innovators who want to actually give back, and there's loads of them out there. So there'll be no shortage of people helping.
Yeah, and look, I think there are quite a number of very successful and very influential people that have already put their hat in the ring, and during this COVID period to share ideas and to offer assistance. Part of what concerns me is it appears as though maybe that hasn't been taken up as much as it should be, and I know that the current government has been flooded with pressures, and this is not a normal scenario, so it's not really an easy situation to navigate, and governments aren't used to moving at the pace that the current government has had to move at.
Yes.
But I hope this sort of window of time gives a chance for those resources and the support from others to really be able to feed in and help government move forward on these utilisations of technology and policies.
Well, I do think tech has proven itself. The UFB's proven itself, RBI's proven itself, and the Ministry of Education roll out those sorts of things. So and I totally agree with what you mean. It's not the first priority when you're saving lives, but 6 months in, 9 months in, as we go forward, as we move forward through this whole experience, there's certainly plenty to discuss. One of the other things about this sector, of course, is that we do like a lively discussion.
We do, and so I think that the last thing that I want to reiterate again, I think, is that we shouldn't miss this unique opportunity that New Zealand has as a country, being broadly COVID-free. We have, yes, a limitation on how many people can come into the country when there's a quarantine period required, but there have been varying suggestions of, hey, there's, military accommodation, there's educational accommodation, there's all sorts of places that are maybe not being leveraged. If we could squeeze and even an extra 1,000 people a month into the country who were going to be working, focusing in tech and innovation, the lift that would bring, I think, would be huge. And there was a little bit of a nudge in that direction, certainly through what I saw from national policy. I would love to see that, an interest in that, but coming from both sides, and a willingness to do that. So
absolutely,
we will see. So the big question for you is, who should everybody be voting for?
I'll never say that. Just vote. Just vote. Do you know one thing I would like to see tech do, and maybe it's going to be something we've got to do next time around because COVID's just completely overshadowed this one, is I'd love to see tech being used to innovate and motivate and inspire the young voters, because I go to the polls thinking, what's it for my kids, what's it going to be for them, because it's their world. And I just love to see, and I'd love to see more, some kind of interaction. I had wondered if, because they had to all go outside, the face-to-face was so much harder, and we had we couldn't more than 10 people, and now and then more than 100, and now we're back to sort of a kind of normal. I had wondered if they might take that opportunity to use tech to reach more, but I haven't seen that innovation, and I'd love to see that around next time round, because it's so it doesn't matter who you vote for, you got to vote. That's the message, right? Everyone's got to vote. It
does matter. It shouldn't be random, but
you should be thinking about it. Everybody's makes up their own mind, is I guess what I'm trying to say there. But please vote, and I'd love to see more. I'd love to see those stats lift. It's their world, it's the young person's world. It should always be the young people who help, who have that big say. And often it's it's those of us who have been around a while who always stand up to vote. But I'm a big fan of voting.
Yes, well, I think there's that element as time goes on and we become a little bit more aware of the role that government plays and in our lives, we get so on, that we're much more likely to vote. But we've been having that discussion amongst the team at the office here today around voting. And it often seems to take a few years for those that have reached the age of being able to vote before they necessarily get into it. But I agree. Well, that's great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on this special episode of the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Thank you, Sarah Putt, for joining the discussion and your valuable contributions, and we look forward to seeing just what the ultimate results are of the election.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thanks. New Zealand Tech Podcast, the voice of the tech community, proudly supported by Umbrella Connect.